as you can see, I've already got started with this little hoop. You might recognise the symbol from Instagram. Here are the templates. I just used some tape to stick it down to the table, and I used my Sublime stitching pen, my well-used pen, and some transfer paper. You can find out more about that on my website. You need to use the reverse design if you're going to use that, or you could use some sort of semi-permanent pen like an aquatrick marker. So I've already stitched in the heart and the one detail. I used back stitches, so I outlined the edge first and then filled in the rest just with back stitch. And now we're going to do some padded satin stitch. So I've got this lovely red thread, which I think is probably the closest match to the one that Instagram actually use. So what we're going to do, if you haven't seen my stitch tutorial video this week, padded satin stitch has little seed stitches underneath it, and what they do is they raise up the satin stitches that you put over the top, and they just kind of support them a little bit. So what you get is that nice padded effect, and it works really nicely. So what you need to do once you've stitched the heart and the one is just stitch some little seeds around. Now you need to make sure that you're doing this nice and evenly. I'd also make sure that you go around fairly closely but not right next to the one in the heart, just so that the satin stitches will have some support around the edges there. Okay, so you don't need to draw them on or anything, you can just go for it. The fabric I'm using is just a little scrap out of my fabric stash. It's cute, isn't it, with these little hearts? You can use anything you like, just see what you've got. It would look really nice on a plain fabric or a patterned. And I'm using a 3-inch hoop this week because it's a nice small design. Okay, so you can see, I've gone completely off camera. What am I doing there? I mean, come on, a few weeks in, you think I've got the hang of this, but never mind, apologies for that. We're basically going to do the satin stitches over. Hey, and I've got back on screen roughly for this. What am I doing there? Oh, there we go. Well done. Satin stitches over the top. The real trick with this is to come out right next to that stitch. You can see that I've outlined the edge of this, and I think this is really helpful, particularly because this is a bigger shape. I'm choosing to do my satin stitches this way around because I think that's going to be more manageable just in terms of length, but also I think kind of making sure when the satin stitches get up to the heart and the one, I think it'll be more manageable and be much more easy to do that this way around. So just stitch a satin stitch as you normally would. Obviously it's a little bit bigger than we perhaps normally would do. Use 3 strands throughout, and this is where satin stitch, where you stitch with gaps and then filling in, kind of comes into its own really, because it makes that really, really nice neat finish. You can see that shine already, just look at that little section. It's so nice. It does use up a lot of thread though, I'm not going to lie. That's okay, so make sure that you've got plenty in. I'm going to try and tie a knot in the back of this while I'm talking about this. Make sure you've got a full skein of thread of whatever colour you're using. If you decide to use this one, you could stitch it in any colour you like, it doesn't have to be. This one is 3705, it's a DMC colour. And obviously I've just used white for the rest of the design, but you could stitch it in any colour you like. Just make sure you've got a full skein before you start. So I'm going to tie off at the back and trim the excess because we don't want that coming through, so try and get that nice and close if you can. I'm using my Thread Heaven because I've temporarily misplaced my Thread Magic, but it's essentially the same thing. Just a bit of thread conditioner is really, really useful for satin stitch. It's a bit of an investment piece, but totally worth it because it really, really helps just to help the thread glide through the fabric, and also it'll keep it in really nice condition when you finish stitching as well. So just double knot that, and again I'll just trim off what we don't need there. So I'm just going to do a little bit of this smaller section just to show you how I'm doing that. I'm not going to film me stitching all of this. We'll be here all afternoon because it is Friday afternoon when I'm filming this, folks. It's been a busy week and I'm sorry that this is a little bit late. Yeah, sorry, it's just everything's a bit manic. You can see here then that I'm stitching stitching the shorter edges there. You do it in exactly the same way, just make sure you're going right up to your back stitches where you've stitched in the white, because if we can make sure we haven't got any gaps there, then that'll look super duper neat. Don't worry if you catch your fabric every time, because that clearly does happen. Just make sure your needle's not going through it, because that's annoying when that happens too. Happens to the best of us every now and again. So you can see that I'm just leaving gaps and going back to fill in. I'm making sure that I'm coming out the other side and covering up that back stitching that I've done around the edge there. I don't want to see any of that visible when I've finished, because that's going to kind of spoil the effect of the padded satin a little bit. So really take your time, try and make sure that you're coming up outside the line and covering it all up, and then go as close as you dare to those back stitches just to make sure that we haven't got any unwanted gaps. And you can see that the seeds underneath are really supporting those satin stitches. It gives that nice sort of poofy effect. I'm just going to turn that round. Sometimes what you might want to do is just kind of lay out your thread, kind of work out where it's going, particularly with a long stitch like this. I've been doing those short stitches, and now this stitch is going to go right to the end, so I'm just going to lay it out, put my thumb on top and work out where my needle needs to go, and that just helps me to keep it really nice and straight. That's a top tip for you there. Because sometimes that's when you kind of switch in between the long and the short stitches, that's when it can go a bit wonky a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to do it again, going the other way, just to make sure that I'm going exactly down the side of that edge of the number there. Work out where I need to be. Sometimes you need to put your thumb down, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can just do it sort of by eye when you've worked it out, but there we go. Don't be afraid to wiggle it a little bit with your thumb and your finger. And ta-da! That's what it looks like when it's all covered. I've just finished the back, as I always do. And you can see that lovely raised texture. So a little bit of fun with this week's project. I hope you like it. Let me know how you get on.